Chapter 3 Peter Pan and Tinker Bell. After the children fell asleep, all three nightlights yawned and went out. Soon, there was another light in the room. It was 1,000 times brighter than the nightlights, although it wasn't really a light. It made the light by flashing about so quickly. When it came to rest, you could see it was a fairy no longer than your hand. It was a girl named Tinker Bell. She wore a leaf as a dress. She flittered this way and that way, opening drawers and closets. A moment later, the window was blown open and Peter came in. He had carried Tinker Bell part of the way, and his hands were still covered in fairy dust. "Tinker Bell," he said softly. "Tink, where are you?" Tink was in a jug at the moment. Peter spotted her. "Do come out. Tell me, where did they put my shadow?" The loveliest tinkle of bells answered him. It was fairy language. Tink said the shadow was in the big chest of drawers. Peter jumped at the chest and scattered the contents on the floor. He found his shadow. He also locked Tink in the drawer by accident. Peter tried to reattach his shadow. He tried sticking it on with soap from the bathroom. It was no use. He started to cry. His sobs woke Wendy. "Boy, why are you crying?" she asked. She wasn't scared at the sight of the small boy in her room. Peter could be a very polite boy. He had learned all about grand gestures at fairy ceremonies. He rose and bowed to her. She was pleased and bowed back from her bed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Wendy Moira Angela Darling," she replied. "What's yours?" "Peter Pan." "Is that your whole name?" she asked. For the first time, Peter thought about his short name. "Yes," he said sharply. "Where do you live?" asked Wendy. "Second star to the right," said Peter, "and then straight on till morning." "That's a funny address," said Wendy. "What do you put on letters?" "Don't get letters," said Peter. Wendy studied Peter. "But your mother must get letters." "Don't have a mother," said Peter. Not only did he not have a mother, Peter didn't want a mother. He saw no use for one. "No wonder you were crying." Wendy jumped out of bed and ran to him. "I wasn't crying about mothers. I'm upset my shadow won't stick on." Wendy spied the shadow on the floor. "How awful," she said. "It must be sewn on." She got her sewing needle and began to work. She sewed it on quickly, and soon it was behaving like a proper shadow. Peter danced. "Look how clever I am. I attached my shadow." He had forgotten all about Wendy's help. Wendy was shocked. Never did she see such a conceited boy. Peter laughed when he saw her angry face. "I can't help crowing when I am pleased with myself, Wendy." It was true. And more often than not, Peter was very pleased with himself. "Oh, Wendy," Peter said, "I do know that one woman is of more use than 20 boys. I can tell you that." This made Wendy feel better. "I shall kiss you, Peter." Peter had never been kissed and didn't know what one was. He held out his hand to her. "I shall know what one is when you give it to me." She didn't want to hurt his feelings, so she gave him a small thimble. He stared at the thimble. "Now I shall give you a kiss." He plopped an acorn into her hand. "Thank you, Peter. I shall wear it around my neck on a chain." Wendy was quite lucky she put that acorn on that chain around her neck, for it would save her life one day. "How old are you?" she asked. Peter didn't know. "I ran away the day I was born. I heard Father and Mother talking about what I was to be when I grew up. I didn't ever want to become a man. I always want to have fun. So I ran away to Kensington Gardens and lived a long, long time among the fairies." Wendy was fascinated with his fairy stories. He shared how fairies came to be. "You see, Wendy, when the first baby laughed for the first time, the laugh broke into 1,000 pieces. Those pieces went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. There really ought to be a fairy for every girl and boy." "Ought to be?" asked Wendy. "Isn't there?" "No," said Peter. "You see, children grow up and no longer believe in fairies. Every time a child says, 'I don't believe in fairies,' one drops down and dies." At that moment, Peter realized that Tinker Bell was being awfully quiet. "Tink, where are you?" Wendy's heart fluttered. "You don't mean there's a fairy in this very room, do you?" "She was just here," said Peter. "You don't hear her, do you?" They both listened. "The only sound I hear," said Wendy, "is the sound of tinkling bells." Peter smiled. "That's fairy language. I think I hear something too." That's when he realized the sound came from the chest of drawers. "Wendy, I do believe I shut Tink in the drawers." He let poor Tink out, and she flew about the nursery screaming with fury.